Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of LGOtv Big Talk. And why Big Talk? Because I hate small talk. So what's the biggest talk we can have right now, at the end of October as we're leading into the election? And it's the election. We're going to talk politics today. So if you hate politics, feel free to just press stop right now. But if you're like me and you're worried about the fate of this world and you don't know what you're going to do, you got to listen today, especially if you were someone who has had trouble in the past, just sort of squaring where you've been historically with where your party of choice has taken you. My guest today is my dear friend, Scott Monty, the always wonderful, the always brilliant, the always positive, and now, unfortunately, COVID positive Scott Monty. You like how I did that, Scott? Scott is a strategic communications and leadership advisor, author of Timeless and Timely newsletter, which, by the way, you gotta subscribe to. And he's the only classics major who's been the head of digital communications for a Fortune 10 brand. Scott and I first met because we're both on the speaking circuit together. And I have gotten the opportunity to get to know him over the years. And I am constantly impressed by his ability to take incredible history and show us through today's lens how it's still relevant. And Scott, I want to talk to you today. Let's start with leadership. Let's start with leadership right now with where we are. But let's start by you. Let's start with you and talk about how you're feeling.
Well, Laura, I've been better. I'm going to take the mask off. This is tough.
Because that mask is So for those of you who are not watching this live, for those of you who are listening, we just got a mask gag here. There was a second mask. I love it. Because it's not just important to wear masks. You got to wear two masks.
Well, that was my Walter mask. I don't know if you recognize Walter from Jeff Dunham. He wears a bow tie. So he's kind of my kindred spirit, although Walter's a lot grumpier than I am. And look, even though I've been diagnosed with COVID, my symptoms are mild. You know, it's not really much to be concerned about at this point. And I will go out on a limb to say I am your first COVID positive guest on the show. I don't know if that's the case.
You know, I've had 4 guests so far who have had to teach themselves how to walk again, but I have not had anyone, actually, no, sorry, 3. The 4th is coming up, but I have not had anyone who is currently COVID positive. I've had blind guys. You name it. I've had, but I've not had COVID.
Well, I'm not going to hold a candle to any of those people. This is a minor inconvenience in the spirit of things. But look, I've got to quarantine. I got to be safe. I got to treat the people around me with respect and kindness. And I think that's a metaphor for what we're going to be talking about today. So I think it's a perfect segue.
Yeah, respect and kindness. Where did respect and kindness go? I remember, growing up, and I was taught the golden rule, right? Treat other people like you want to be treated. And that meant respect and kindness. Like, where did we lose our way?
I don't know. I really don't know. And I'm writing about this for the latest issue of my newsletter today. I went out on a limb there too. I said, this week is going to be about politics. And is it okay to mix business and politics? And in my mind, usually it isn't. Usually politics and religion are that third rail. They're the third rail of polite society, and they're the third rail of business. You kind of avoid any kind of controversial topic because largely when you're in business, when you have a family, you have people that have all kinds of worldviews about things, and you don't want to offend anyone. But at the same time, if you're not offending anyone, then you're probably pretty milquetoast at the same time. And is that really getting you anything? Sometimes you need to take a stand and show people what it is you believe in so they can decide whether they believe in it too. And, I just saw a clip this morning from Jimmy Fallon. He had Pete Buttigieg on last night. And Jimmy said, Pete, why are you going on Fox News all the time now? Basically you're in enemy territory. Why are you going on there?
And he's lighting it up. He's lighting it up on Fox.
He's incredible because he's approaching it from a very common sense, common ground kind of way. And he said, look, you need to go where people are. You can't assume that they're going to come to you. And bottom line is, even if you do go where they are, you're not going to win over everyone. That's just the reality. But if you change a few minds, if you reach a few people and help them understand there's a different way of thinking, then what more can you ask for?
So I want to reassure people who are listening that this isn't just me, like old-fashioned longtime Democrat talking to another old-fashioned longtime Democrat about why Democrats are cool. You are not a Democrat. You have not been a Democrat. And you and I actually got to know each other quite well during 2016, where we spent a lot of time texting each other and you saying, I can't believe I'm actually going to vote for a Clinton.
Yeah, well, I hate to be the cliche, but this is the case where, I've been a Republican for my entire adult life. I started with a vote for Reagan and pretty much voted Republican the whole way. Maybe an occasional Democrat here or there, and an independent, certainly. But I never really considered leaving the party. And as the cliche goes, I didn't leave the party left me. The party and the conservatism I stood for, and I've always been a centrist. I've never been this far right wing kind of conservative. I always believe in fiscal responsibility. I think that's something we can all get behind. I'm not a hawk, but I do believe in standing up for our rights and for the oppressed who can't stand up for themselves, whether it's here or around the world. I'm socially liberal. I believe people shouldn't be told how to live their lives by the government. And if that makes me more of a Democrat than a Republican, okay. But the bottom line is, I believe in treating people with respect, and as we said, kindness and decency. And I think that's what we have to deal with today. We have an example in the White House who is none of those things, and who never will be any of those things, despite how people hold out hope. Oh, maybe the presidency will change him. It won't. He's a cruel human being who is focused on himself, and we need a leader who is focused on treating people with respect and being concerned with people other than himself.
So was there a moment in time in the 2016 election where you were like, "Oh, shit"? Were
Well,
you
I mean,
hoping maybe you were hoping for, a different nominee, but was there a moment where it sort of all came crashing down on you that this was gonna be the vote you never wanted to have to place? Because it wasn't just that you didn't like Trump. I mean, you've had a history of not liking the Clintons either. But a lot of people were like, "I'm just gonna not vote because I the lesser of two evils," right? I'm not
yeah,
gonna or, they people had all sorts of excuses.
I, you have to vote. I mean, that's your civic duty, and to
Yes.
me, shirking that duty is leaving it in somebody else's hands. We all have a duty to vote. And look, I look out there today, this week, last week. I see people waiting in these interminable lines
Yes, yes.
and overcoming personal hardships and horrible weather and other things to make sure their vote gets counted. And who am I to throw away an opportunity where I can walk across the street and easily cast a vote, and to do it for a third party, or to just withhold my vote? I mean, to me, you owe it to yourself to come down on one side or the other and to make your voice heard, even if you feel like it doesn't count. Because I think a lot of people have felt that in recent years. I'm not going to vote. I'm in a blue state. I'm in a red state. It's going to go one way or the other. Well, guess what? I am in what was a reliably blue state until 2016 in Michigan. And Trump won this state by about 46,000 votes. It comes down to that much of a razor thin margin. And I think we owe it to ourselves to be part of the voice that is speaking up for what we believe in. I can't hear you, Laura. I don't know if you're on mute or what. There you
I
are.
don't know. There I am. How's that? Am I back?
Much better.
I'm back. So I've always said to my kids they can be anything in the world they want to be. I don't care what their career is. I don't care what their religion is. I don't care what their sexual identity is. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. The only thing they can't be is non-voters. Like if you don't go vote on the first Tuesday of every month, you don't get to come home for Thanksgiving. And I don't just mean like every 4 years. I mean dog catcher. Like you got to vote for everyone, even right down to like who's running for your city council, because frankly, unless you are in active duty military, the person who is your city councilor or your mayor or on your school committee has more impact on your daily life than the person who's in the White House. And that's actually the seeding ground of how we get eventually the people that are going to be in the White House. But the people who decide that they're not going to vote, it's infuriating to me, because I do feel like we get the democracy we deserve. And when you look at 2016 and you see that the biggest winner was did not vote, and then people are like, why are we in this position we're in? It's like, we're in this position we're in because people didn't bother.
That's right. Yeah, and yesterday in 1898, this is perfect. Teddy Roosevelt said, "It's not only your right to vote, but it's your duty if you are indeed free men and American citizens. I would rather have you come to the polls, even if you voted against me,
Yes.
than have you shirk your duty."
Yeah, and I think that's it, right? That's it right there. That I was texting. I have a little group chain with the women in my family. We're it's the jury, right? Because you have like a murder of crows. Well, we have a jury of Jewesses, like me and the Jewish women in my family. It's the jury, and my mom texted this morning and said that there's been record turnout in Texas. Is that good or is that bad? Now, not every woman in my family is voting for Biden. So, is it good or is it bad? I don't how do I define that? And my response was, it's good. Like, regardless of the outcome, it's good, because more votes means more credibility in the election. More credibility in the election means a smoother either continuation or transition of power. And that means peace. And what we really need is peace. So at the bottom line, I've been telling people all week, I don't care who you vote for. I mean, I care, but I don't really care who you vote for. As long as you vote, just vote, because the more votes we have, the less contested this election is going to be.
Right. I mean, look, it's a matter of math. Chris Penn would be extremely proud of us now, talking about numbers here. The greater numbers you get, the more certain the outcome is, and it puts credence behind the numbers that you're getting. When you have fewer people participating, it's a smaller sample size. Therefore, there's a larger variation there as to what it might turn out. Which is why the polls in 2016 showed that it was likely that Hillary Clinton was going to win, and she didn't. There wasn't a big turnout. But you look at what's going on now, people are motivated, and I don't care what they're motivated by. To your point, they're engaged in the civic process. They are absolutely committed to seeing what happens on one side or the other. And look, Laura, here's the thing. I think one of the reasons that people are turned off by politics these days is because the media has turned it into almost like an athletic competition. It's one side versus the other. It's the Yankees versus the Red Sox. It's good versus evil. It's my team wins, your team loses. You know what? We're all Americans. We're all on the same team. And we don't have to feel like our success comes at the expense of your loss. And I think that's where we've gotten to today as a society, where I see friends, relatives who are Trump supporters who just want to stick it in the eye of the liberal, and who think that Russians are better than Democrats. They would think that Russians are more patriotic towards America than Democrats are. That's where we've gotten at this point. And it is a dangerous, dangerous way of thinking. Politics for years has been about one party or the other. And look, George Washington, all the way back in his farewell address, warned us about the dangers of having two parties and that there would be this fractiousness. But the reality is, we've traditionally come together as a country to heal our wounds. Look, after the Civil War, for God's sake, that was the big mission, and it took decades to do. But the country eventually healed. Well, depends on where you're from and what your perspective is. Let's say on the surface, at least, we healed. And I think that's what we need today, is somebody that is going to unite us. Because the bottom line is, the guy that's in the Oval Office right now does nothing to unite all of America. He does nothing to reach out and say, we're all in this together. It's all about divisiveness.
But do you think that those messages, I mean, thinking about business leaders, like we started off by talking about what you're going to put in your newsletter this week about should you mix, or what is just in the last newsletter you put out, should you mix politics and business? And you know, for years, I was told by the woman who was running some of my social media, like, oh, don't get too political. I know you're really political in your personal life, but don't get political on, you know, on social media. And it felt to me like every time I put something political in a tweet or in a newsletter or in a post, I was like taking a risk, right? And frankly, when I didn't, it felt like I was being fake, like I wasn't being real. And I think like in 2018, we saw in the Super Bowl all of these ads that were like no longer Paris Hilton eating a sloppy burger, you know, on the hood of a car, but there were companies that were working really hard to show their values, like what they cared about. So if you are a business leader today, if you are thinking about this, if you're in a place where people are looking at you, do you come down on one side or the other? Like, is it, how do you do it in a way that isn't, it's me versus you, it's us versus them, I'm winning, you're losing? If you're in business right now, you can't be milquetoast, right? You can't just not take a stance, but how do you take that stance? And what do you do with the risk that you're going to take with alienating possibly half of the people who are your, or maybe more, who are your customers?
Right. Well, look, this isn't easy, and it's not all in, all out. It's not one thing or the other. It's got to be a nuanced approach, and you need to assess as to whether it's right for you and your business. But here's the thing: it doesn't necessarily mean taking a stand on the issues, pro-immigration, anti-immigration, pro-Second Amendment, anti-Second Amendment. You don't have to get that granular. But if you can find things that are common to all of us, things that we can all get behind, um, you know, looking after those that are the most vulnerable among us, being kind to strangers, and looking for ways to build out of what's broken. I think those are messages that are needed right now, and that we all can agree with wherever we sit on the political spectrum. So if you stand up for what's right and what is what's filled with integrity, and if you don't give your own value system away, I think that's the key. To me, and I've long been a closet fan of Howard Stern, which, you know, for somebody who's more conservative than not, it seems like anathema. But Howard Stern, first of all, he's an excellent interviewer. He manages to bring people out of their shell like no one else. He makes them feel at ease and comfortable. But the second thing that Howard Stern always does, and has always done, is speaks out against hypocrisy.
Hmm.
He doesn't take it well when someone says one thing and then does another. And to me, as a business leader, if there is something going on that is against your moral code and who you stand, what you stand for as a leader, and what's behind the values of your business, I think you ought to say something. And is it risky? Well, yeah, there's a lot of things that are risky in this life, and you don't succeed without taking some risks. That's the reality. Um, I want to read you a poem, Laura, by William Arthur Ward. It's a short poem. It's called "To Risk." It goes like this: to laugh is to risk appearing a fool. To weep is to risk appearing sentimental. To reach out to another is to risk involvement. To expose feelings is to risk exposing your true self. To place your ideas and dreams before a crowd is to risk their loss. To love is to risk not being loved in return. To hope is to risk despair. To try is to risk failure. But risks must be taken, because the greatest hazard in life is to risk nothing. The person who risks nothing, does nothing, has nothing, is nothing. He may avoid suffering and sorrow, but he cannot learn, feel, change, grow, or live. Chained by his servitude, he's a slave who's forfeited all freedom. Only a person who risks is free.
I love that. That's fantastic. I feel that way so often. You know, I think a lot about the things that I do where I put myself out on the very edge. And I came to the realization about a month ago that I'm a bridge burner. And I don't mean that like, I burn bridges and I'm like, screw you, I'm out of here, motherfuckers, I'm gone. But more that like, I tend to burn bridges because I believe so fully in things. And along the way to believing in those things, I find other optimists, idealists, like crazy, Don Quixotes that are going to tilt at the windmills with me. And it's in finding those fellow warriors on that path towards, that long arc that bends towards justice. I get to live. I get to truly live and to be in that space. And while I know that there is pain on that path, because there will be people that I will offend along the way, there's also so much joy in getting there. And I feel like you can't have the high highs without the low lows. And maybe that's where it comes down to with communicating to customers, or communicating to family, or communicating to friends, is that there will be people who stand with you, and the ones that you find who stand with you when you put yourself out there are actually going to become true loyalists. They're the ones who actually will go with you anywhere, because like in this world where suddenly wearing a mask is political, right? So like if you put something out in your company newsletter about wearing a mask, and suddenly people are like, screw you, clearly you're one of those liberals, I'm not wearing a mask, I'm going to go buy my stuff from someone else. I don't know, maybe that's all right. But is the opposite all right, where you put something out to your family, your friends, and you say like, I'm never wearing a mask again, and then you have those people, like, does that just further push us into these silos? How do we come together in this, like, saying what's good is always good idea?
Right. I mean, because look, what's good for me might not be what's good for you, but again, it's about finding a common ground. And to me, wearing a mask is a statement that you care about other people.
Mm.
And I'm not talking about a statement like you're trying to virtue signal to people. I mean, you're wearing it because you realize and you understand that I mean, look, would you not cover your mouth when you cough, or put your nose into your elbow when you sneeze?
I just lick total strangers. That's just what I do.
I mean, don't lick a doorknob for all that. I mean, good grief. It's just common courtesy.
Yeah.
It's polite society. And I'm sorry that we have to remind people how to treat other people well. But if that's what it comes down to, and boy, people think it's a political statement. Since when is being kind and considerate political? I
Yes.
mean,
Right. It's crazy. So people followed you. You have, you have a huge social media following. People were following you. They were pretty much comfortable with getting classics from you, from getting corporate communications from you, from getting smart digital communications from you, and maybe a little conservative politics here and there, but sort of generally speaking. And now you are one of the most outspoken supporters of Joe Biden on the internet. Like, your content is quality. I love it. But not everybody does. You got a lot of flack for that. How'd that go?
well, look, when I was at Ford, I had to be very careful as an executive there. I was probably one of the most publicly accessible executives at Ford. Um, I couldn't be seen as coming down on one side or another.
Because you ran
Uh,
all of digital communications for Ford Motor Company. This
right.
is not a
And
small job.
I would get involved in a lot of online communications. People would query me on Facebook. I'd jump into discussion forums and blog posts and whatnot, just to be the voice of the company and let them know what was going on. And if I was seen as partisan, that could damage the progress that the company was trying to make. Because look, Ford doesn't make cars and trucks for Republicans or Democrats. They make cars for people who drive. And bottom line is that's all political stripes. So I had to be very careful in that kind of role. Now that I'm running my own business, I can decide what I want to stand for. I can make the call on whether this is damaging to my brand or not. I can decide what kind of people I want to do business with and what kind of people I don't. Am I cutting out a portion of my potential customer base? Yeah.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't necessarily feel good about working with someone who I couldn't. It's not even disagreeing with politically. It's about not having the same fundamental human values. And to me, that's so important in all of this. It's having integrity. and treating people with respect and being decent and being kind and not making any of those things political. Um, can I disagree with somebody politically and still be friends with them?
Sure.
Absolutely. But it seems like it less so than now because of the vitriol that comes around some of this. The automatic response, the autonomic response, almost it's almost built in that you're ready to jump down someone's throat when you see that they oppose you. And I've had plenty of political discussions with people online, publicly and in private forums, um, where we agree to disagree and we realize we're not going to change each other's minds, but we can at least walk away respecting each other.
Hmm.
And I think those interactions are fewer than they ever have been. And it's sad to me.
It is. I think it is. It is so unfortunate. I mean, you and I had a great conversation in Miami over a bunch of cocktails. I remember, we both happened to be in town. I was coming in for a keynote the next day. You had just finished a training with a client, and you met me at the bar at the hotel I was staying in. We had great cocktails, and we had a conversation. I remember about how Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill used to fight all day long. And at the end of the day, they'd get together for a drink, and they shared the biggest thing in common that they could possibly share, which was love for our country. And how that just is gone. It's just disappeared. And I don't know if it's the 24-hour news cycle that forced it. I don't know, sort of where it came from. I don't know. Maybe it's losing civics education in school, and so we see politics as something that happens over there, like it's a spectator sport, in the same way that we think war is like their war. It doesn't involve me. Like, it's this thing that's outside of us. And because we're all able to create these silos where we can have private schools or private roads or private experiences, our own specific news feed, it's almost like we can divorce ourselves from what affects other people. I mean, even in the beginning, you were saying, like, there's some people who are waiting in line for interminable lengths, whereas you and I, like, you walked across the street, I dropped off my ballot at a drop box, and that was that. We're all living, like, there was something in the beginning of COVID where somebody said, look, we all may be in different boats, but we're all in the same storm. And I think, frankly, we're in different storms too. So I wonder if, part of that is why we're in this space right now. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that actually has a large amount to do with that. And this notion of separate experiences is actually, I've planned this, this edition of my newsletter for some time in the future, because I've been collecting stories about it. When you and I grew up, and you grew up in Florida, I grew up in Connecticut, and yet you could count on a common experience. If you went downstairs first thing on Saturday morning before everybody else was up, and you got your bowl of sugared cereal and you sat down in front of the television.
Fruit Loops for life. Fruit Loops, baby. Fruit Loops for life.
What's wrong with Fruit Loops? You were probably watching the Bugs Bunny Hour, the Super Friends, or some show like that. But here's the thing: every kid across America had these common experiences. Just like at 11:35 every night, the majority of Americans were watching Johnny Carson.
Mm-hmm.
It was a shared experience, and we could all relate to the same thing and know we were coming from the same place. Sure, we had different political perspectives or different, we were at different places in life, either generationally, monetarily, whatever, but we all had that shared experience. Well, now everybody's got their own TikTok experience, their own YouTube experience, their own social media feed on Twitter or Facebook or whatever. There's very little that we have in common anymore. So when we have moments like a presidential debate, the Super Bowl, the Oscars, these are some few cultural touch points that we can all begin to share some commonality in. And I think when, and I don't want to be, a social anthropologist about all of this, that's not my area of expertise, but when you think back to the mid 90s, when Bill Clinton was in office and Newt Gingrich came along with a scorched earth policy.
Oh, I remember that.
That was the birth of Fox News.
Yes.
Right? So suddenly he's like, screw you guys, I'm going home, like Cartman. And
Yep.
everybody went over to Fox News that was aligned with Newt Gingrich. And they had this tunnel vision as to what America was all about. Still do. I mean, that should be no newsflash to anyone here. But it's dangerous when we get too wrapped up in that singular experience and don't understand that there are other viewpoints out there. And it's easier now than ever to be able to share clips and share stories and whatnot. But the question is, are you getting somebody to sit down and view it or read it with the same level of openness or maybe a critical eye versus somebody just looking at a headline and saying, that I've heard that before, I'm not going to put any stock in it. And I think that's where we are.
It's so hard because, we're getting, whatever, fake news and Russian bots and all of this stuff. It's so hard to know. I find myself more and more not even going on social media as much. And it's so difficult because, there are people that I love and people that I respect and that I follow. And even if I don't agree with them, I follow them because I want to see what they're thinking about. I want to understand where they're coming from. You and I had an exchange just yesterday. We won't name names, about somebody who was like, yeah, we don't need this and we don't need that. And they should open up schools and forget masks. And you were like, so I just got COVID from, all of this. And and this is somebody who I respect deeply and who I think is a pretty smart person generally. And, I want to reply, but then what do? Then you end up in this, like, he said, she said, I said, you said, back and forth. And everybody is so entrenched in their ideas. It's almost become, we've got identity politics, which I know has been so, it's been so damaging, but I think we're also finding our own identities in this. And, we're so stuck in these silos that it's hard to bring ourselves out of them.
It is. And I think it comes from what you mentioned at the beginning of the show, that people have traditionally kind of picked a side, picked a team. And that's it. Look, I've been out here in Michigan for 12 years now. I'm still a diehard Red Sox fan. Probably will be my whole life. I'm New England Patriots. Don't go easy. Boston Bruins, Boston Celtics. I am a Boston sports fan for life. Right? Will I ever change sides? Probably not. I can't see why anybody would like the Lions, but here we are. And again, I go back to the way the media has treated politics. I think it's treated that you pick a side and you stay with it. Well, what if the side doesn't stay with you? What if they no longer represent the values that you have? Yeah, they can take different positions on issues and whatnot, but really, do they? If I stood back right now and put a blindfold on everyone, and I said, all right, close your eyes, picture in your mind one party that stands for kindness and inclusiveness and looking out for people, and one side that doesn't, where do you think you'd fall? And what do those things mean to you ultimately? Now, if you want to go on the other side and go, okay, we'll picture a party that stands for economic security and secure borders and safety. What does that mean to you, right? Pick your side. Well, here's the thing. I don't think either one of those things is mutually exclusive. And I think we've gotten to the point where people think that you have to pick one or the other. It's an either or decision. And look, life throws a lot of changes at you. And if you're not willing to go with the flow during that and change opinions, maybe change sides as part of it, then I don't know what to tell you. I mean, we are human beings are not trees. We are not planted in the same place and can't move. We're designed to be flexible and to move physically as well as emotionally and mentally, as long as our values remain the same.
So what happens when the Patriots decide not to continue to employ Tom Brady and he leaves and now they fall apart? Do you still stay a fan? Has the party left you? What happens there?
Hey, look, I live I live 10 miles away from the big house here in Michigan where Tom Brady got his start. I am not going to be a Buccaneers fan by any stretch of the imagination.
So, what about people who say, yeah, look, those things aren't mutually exclusive, but under Biden, my taxes are going to go up. It's going to be hard for me to run my small business. I'm worried about crime. There's part of me that thinks that maybe, as much as I hate what he's saying, he might be right. Like, what about people who yeah, I want it to be a happy, wonderful place and we can all dance under rainbows, but also I have people who rely on me and I don't know if I'll be able to keep them employed. I mean, I think, there's this question that Ronald Reagan asked, which was, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? Right. That led to the landslide election for him in 80, as you know. And I think there are people who are saying, I actually am better off than I was 4 years ago. But I think the more important question is, are we better off? Are we better off as a country? But I think that's a really hard vote sometimes for people to say, I'm going to do what's better for everyone else, even though I know I'm going to get screwed in the process.
It is. And to the people that are convinced that their taxes are going to go up under Joe Biden, well, first of all, Biden has pledged, and we all know how good politicians are at their pledges. Read my lips, no new taxes.
No new taxes, right.
But he's pledged to raise taxes on people making more than $400,000 a year. Okay, so that's going to hurt a very specific slice of the American public. If you're making $400,000 or more a year, I think it's great that you have the opportunity to help other people suddenly.
Yes.
Is it going to make it harder for you to do business? Maybe. Are there regulations that are going to hold you back? Possibly. There have been regulations that have affected all kinds of people all over the country for the last 40 years, for good and ill. When I was raised in this country, I was raised to understand that you make sacrifices for the future. That you put your savings in the bank and you watch it grow by compound interest. And effectively, that's the way I think we need to think about our politics, is that we make some short-term sacrifices. It's the same thing as wearing masks. People are offended that they have to make a short-term sacrifice, that they have to affect their own freedom because it's uncomfortable to them. Well, guess what? We all do things that are uncomfortable. And doing the right thing isn't always easy. Look, in the Great Depression, and my grandparents were raised in the Great Depression, people had to make the ultimate sacrifice. 30% unemployment at the time. It was horrible. And we had to make some real cuts and to expand a lot of things to bring America back. And the fact that it ended with a world war was certainly not ideal. But you look at that, even we're coming out of a depression and we still have the moral, not authority, but at least the integrity to be able to go to war, albeit Churchill was asking for help for about a year or two beforehand. But when we were finally affected, we said, that's it. We're putting all of our resources toward this, even though we're hurting as a country already. We're going to put all of our resources toward it. We're going to sacrifice for the present for the future. We're going to sacrifice what we're doing in the present for the future. And I think American society has just become all about me, all about what's in it for me, instead of what are we doing together. And I don't know what the answer is to help people think more collectively. And to come, and I it's not one side or the other that owns this notion of unity. I think both sides have lots of reasons to think about things that we can be doing together to protect the American ideal. But we need to find that common ground.
Yeah, I think it's the risk you take when you have a country that was built on the notion of rugged individualism that is suddenly asking people to think communally. I mean, I think in a way it sort of goes against everything that's in our core. And I'm going to say something really controversial here, which is that I think we should reinstate the draft. I do. I mean, it doesn't have to be military service. It can be community service. It can be, spending a year or two as a volunteer fireman or, teaching in a classroom, AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, something. But this idea that we believe in ourselves before our country I think is the long tail on that is where we are today. And I think, if you look back at generations that had to serve alongside people who didn't look like them, who didn't think like them, who didn't pray like them, who didn't love like them, there was a lot more empathy towards other people because we understood that there in fact were other people in the world. But I think the fact that we haven't had to do that has allowed us to create these barriers around ourselves where we can only have the rugged individualism. But I think the rugged individualism doesn't work unless there is a community. So yeah, that's my controversial idea.
Well, I think that's interesting. I mean, a community service based draft. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, quite frankly. And hey, give people dozens of options as to how they want to execute it. Okay, you've been drafted. What are you going to do for your year of community service?
Right. What is your year of service?
Yeah. And look, if you could tie that to something like student loan forgiveness, I don't know all the ins and outs economically about how it might be done, but if you put kind of a carrot and stick there as a way to incentivize people, well, maybe that's a way to approach it. But I think this notion of thinking about the other is absolutely essential. Back to the previous question you asked about, are people going to be harmed? Are their businesses going to be harmed, et cetera? I think we've seen a growth in the split between the haves and the have-nots. And look, the fact that the stock market is doing relatively as well as it is right now, at the same time that unemployment is in the toilet, is a concern. And the president seems to think that the economy is the stock market. At least
Yeah.
that's been his common refrain for the last 4 years. Well, the bottom line is only about 40% of Americans are invested in the stock market or have that level of interest in it that would link it to the economy. There's a lot of people who don't have stocks or who aren't that tied to it. And I think this split, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? The people that were better off to begin with are better off now. So they're not seeing, they don't have that empathetic eye as to what's going on. It's the same thing. Boy, when Bob Woodward was interviewing the president, and he asked them after the George Floyd incident, can you understand the pain and anger that Black Americans feel after this incident? And he goes, wow, you sure drank the Kool-Aid, Bob. I don't feel that at all. Well, that's the problem. You don't have to go through it yourself to be able to understand how someone else might feel in that situation. And if you don't intuitively have empathy, I don't know what to tell you. Most people do have empathy. The number of sociopaths in the world is probably around 5%, according to studies.
It's sure saying it feels bigger now, though, doesn't it?
Well, it does, but that's for a lot of reasons. But a lot of things, look, if you don't feel, it's a difference between not feeling empathy and not being able to feel empathy. And if you don't feel empathy for someone over a situation like that, well, maybe it's because you haven't been exposed to enough of the material about it. Maybe you don't know it's happening. Maybe you don't think it's real because you only have a limited view. I've got my stepmother-in-law who blocked me on Facebook because my fellow Facebook commenters were pissing her off, so she blocked me. She really has views about kneeling during the national anthem during the NFL games. And when I try to explain to her why people are taking this stand, what it is that's making them feel this way. And by the way, these are the very same people that are expending more energy and more effort to try and get to vote than you and I ever will.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that they're being disenfranchised at this level and they're still going out there to vote is amazing. She simply didn't want to understand it. Even when I tried to explain to her, she's like, nope, disrespectful flag, America, patriot, bald eagle soaring in, that's it. Well, yeah. I'm sorry. Maybe you can't reach people like that, but at least if you open up the world to them that they don't see, maybe there's an opportunity for discussion.
That's like, you said, look, it's feeling empathy or being able to feel empathy. But I think that there's a third option, which is the one that terrifies me, which is I think empathy is a libtard agenda. Right? Like it's just the very idea that you're soft if you're even willing to consider it. I mean, the kneeling during the national anthem has nothing to do with the military. In fact, by the way, the NFL charges the military money for those flyovers and the marching and the national anthem and the color guard and all that. It's a marketing ploy. It's not because the NFL is so patriotic. It's because it's a line on their P&L statement. Like, let's just be clear about it. So it's not about that. And it's like kneeling during the national anthem does not affect anyone in the same way that, if my son wants to marry a man, it doesn't affect my other son's marriage to a woman. Like, that's like, it just, when did it become this way? And I feel like the immediate shutdown of the like, oh, well, you're just one of those soft liberals is that third option. And that's the one that's so dangerous right now.
Well, look, to me, it's part of what it takes to be emotionally intelligent. We've heard this term in business circles for a few years, the EQ, your emotional intelligence quotient, basically. And emotional intelligence really is made of I'll give you the shorthand version, like 4 different things. It's about self-awareness, which a lot of people are lacking.
Mm-hmm.
It's about self-management, how you regulate your feelings, how you regulate your response to people. It's about relationship management, the time that you take to actually work on developing relationships with people. And I think social media has given us the ability to put that off. You feel like, oh, I've got a bunch of friends. Well, are they really friends?
Yeah.
Are they people you just see in passing? And then the fourth thing is social awareness. Social awareness is nothing more than empathy, right? Those aren't libtard things. That's a human ask right there. And if you don't have the ability to be emotionally intelligent, then to me, you have no business being in a high profile leadership role.
So let's talk about leadership in the last 10 minutes here. We've talked about empathy, EQ, social awareness, respect, kindness, just willingness to listen, willingness to be wrong. You were a classics major. Talk to me about how your idea of leadership was shaped.
Well, look, I've had a lot of bosses and leaders in my time, and there's a difference between a boss and a leader. I've outlined this in a number of things I've written about. And you had one of my leaders on the show last month, Alan Mullally. I would crawl over a bed of broken glass and rusty nails for this man. Why? Because he would too, right? He would be out there in front and he'd be smiling and encouraging everyone to come along with him. And he'd be looking for ways to lighten the load. He was in it with us. And I think that the leaders that we have that inspire us are people that we develop relationships with, that we hear from on a regular basis. I think consistent communication is absolutely critical to leadership. It's not, I've had bosses who are what I call seagull managers. They swoop in, they crap all over your project, and they fly away. Whether you're at the beach or whether you're at the office, how does that make you feel, right?
And they steal your sandwich too.
Versus the leader that's like a faithful dog alongside you and is willing to cuddle up with you when you're having a tough time, or who is willing to go out and get excited about chasing the stick together. I mean, that's the difference to me of this kind of leadership approach, and consistent communication is part of it. But the other thing is that they're willing to develop a relationship with you, because developing a relationship leads to trust. And trust is the thing that underlies every significant leadership role. Whether you're a political leader, whether you're a business leader, whether you're the leader of your family or viewed as the leader of your family, have you developed a relationship with people that leads to a sense of trust? Yeah. Because if you have trust for long enough, that leads to loyalty. And look, you heard me talk about Alan. I am loyal to a fault to Alan. and will be until my dying day, because he took the time, as busy as he was, to communicate regularly and develop relationships with people.
Yeah, I have met him in person once. I interviewed him on my show for an hour. He has sent me so many emails about how much he loved the conversation and how he's gotten great feedback. And I'm a no one, right? I'm a no one, and has taken the time, and it's so meaningful to me. I can't even imagine what it must have been like to work with him every day, knowing that when he's there looking at you, the sun is shining on you, and when he's not there looking at you, the sun's still shining on you. I mean, it's just his ability to create that relationship, I think, is wonderful, because he sees you as a person. And look, I didn't agree with a single policy idea of George W. Bush, but when he stood on the rubble of the World Trade Center and he had that megaphone and he was like, "America, I hear you. We hear you." I was proud of my president. I was proud to be an American. And I remember looking at my husband saying, "I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I'm really proud right now. I'm proud of him."
Well, and you think back to the beginning of our conversation. I started out voting under Reagan, and Reagan was the master communicator. I mean, he had a way with words, and
Yes.
obviously part of it was his speechwriters, part of it was that he was an actor, but he played the role of a leader really well. When it comes to the Bush family, I've read a lot of their memoirs, a lot of accounts about them. They are kind and decent people, and you
Yes.
may not have agreed with all of their policies, but when you have a moment like that in front of the World Trade Center, that's where the humanity comes out. And if you can't see the humanity in your leaders, then they probably aren't being authentic with you. They probably aren't building relationships with you. They probably aren't trustworthy.
And what's interesting is that, like, even Reagan, again, another president with whom I did not agree with at all, he never took his jacket off in the Oval Office. Such was his respect for the office of the presidency. So it's the kindness, but it's also the understanding of the seriousness of the role. Like, yeah, Reagan was an actor, but he acted like the president because he understood that the president was a role that you had to live up to.
Well, Laura, I think that's probably an unspoken rule of leadership: is how serious does the individual take the job? It doesn't matter whether you're CEO of a small consulting firm, a multinational corporation, or the president of the United States. The way that they show up to the job, and look, it goes for anybody, right down to the customer service person. The way you show up to the job, and the way you take the job seriously, and the way you treat the people around you when you're not making a speech, when you're not on television, when you're not in front of multiple cameras, that speaks volumes about who you are. And people talk about that, and people know, and people can see through a line of BS from a mile away. And to me, leaders that are consistent in their actions and their words, right, and this comes back to integrity, are going to be much more trustworthy.
Yeah, I think I'm assuming you've read a lot of Clayton Christensen's writing, as somebody who took his faith in his role in leadership very, very seriously, as someone I know, as I know you do. And there was a great piece that I had read about 6 months ago, right around the time that he died. Maybe it was longer. I don't know. This year has been a decade, but it was a reboot of an interview that was done with him, where he talked about his graduating class, and where he looked around, and so many of the people he graduated with, so many of the bright, promising future leaders, ended up in prison or losing their businesses, or wrapped up in all of these lawsuits. And he was one of the few who had done well professionally, had done well in terms of romantically, he'd done well health-wise, he'd done well financially, he'd done well on lots of different fronts. Obviously, he died prematurely from cancer, but he had been doing well on all of these fronts, and it was because he told himself very early on that the way you do anything is the way you do everything. So if you don't have to start lying, if you don't have to start cheating, if you don't have to do things behind the scenes in the dark when nobody sees, then you don't have to worry about those things. But once you start doing that. Once you do it once, and you have to keep track of it, and you have to keep track of it, and it becomes this, it becomes this poison that you start drinking. And I think that there's something that's in that, right? Like, if you are somebody who treats people behind the camera the same way you treat people in front of the camera, it's not that hard. It's harder to do the opposite, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, I've always been taught that, when you tell the truth, you don't have to worry about going back to figure out what it is that you said. The truth is always the same. I can't imagine how difficult it must be to lead a life of lies, to have to go back and track, well, to either go back and keep track of the lies that you made, or just not care what people think about what you said and keep lying anyway.
And doubling down and doubling down. And yeah, that's the exhausting part, I think, for me, of this whole administration, is the doubling down on the inhumanity and the lies. Like, that's the thing that's been pretty rough.
Look, one of the terms I think that gets bandied about a lot with this administration is gaslighting. We see something happening right before our very eyes, and they tell us it's not so.
Yeah.
And the origin of the term goes back to 1944. Charles Boyer and Ingrid Bergman in a fantastic film noir. And if you've never seen it, it was actually Angela Lansbury's film debut. If you've never seen it, watch it. It is a powerful, powerful testament to the psychology of someone holding power over someone else and making them think they're crazy for what they're hearing and seeing. And I think when you gaslight someone, you take away their dignity. You take away their ability to think for themselves. And every single human being deserves to be treated with dignity. We all have a point of view that's valid. We all have the ability to see what's going on and to be acknowledged for what we see. But the moment you take that away and tell someone that's not what they're seeing, and again, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, if you're having a discussion with someone and you gaslight them and tell them what they're seeing is not actually happening, then you're violating their dignity. And again, that gets right to the bottom of building relationships and trust.
And that is so important in everything that we do. Like you said, whether we're leader of our family, of our community, of our company, of the free world, really just dignity, trust, humanity. That is it at the end of the day. Scott, this has been such a great conversation. I normally post the comments. For those who are listening to this as a podcast later, you can always join us live on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, because we broadcast these live. But I did not actually share the comments as we were going, because there were tons of comments of things like, why are you having this conversation about politics on LinkedIn? This isn't the place to do it. And then somebody else saying, yeah, but these are actually bigger metaphors for leadership as a whole, and going back and forth. So I didn't post the comments because they were long and they were deep, and but I would encourage people to think about the idea that these metaphors, that the kinds of difficult conversations that we're having right now about the White House, about where you find yourself in terms of your political views, in terms of the party, your own decision to get in the game, right? To go out to vote, to be counted, to say what you feel, to talk to those around you. These are metaphors that we bring towards everything that we're doing. And I think that leads into you and the work that you're doing as a consultant right now. So tell us a little bit about what you do and how people can find you.
Well, thank you so much. And I hope Brent Skinner actually gets a chance to view this.
Name check.
Either live or in review. So the work that I do with clients right now, it's largely around storytelling. I'm a strategic communications and leadership advisor, but I help brands find what's important to them, the values that are important to them, and to help them find through points. And this is where I bring literature and history in to kind of understand what it is that motivates people over time. The trends that we're seeing now, yes, they're beholden to the current platforms and the current situations, but history, if you know anything about history, it doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. And if you can pick out those rhymes, if you can figure out what's coming next based on what you've seen before, then my role is not just as a historian, but it's as a futurist as well. And helping companies steer around that corner, or see around the corner, and be able to steer appropriately and to tell their stories effectively in whatever media matters to them. That's what I do.
Well, I think that is wonderful. It is. I look forward to getting your Timeless and Timely newsletter. Every time it pops into my box, I delete every single newsletter I get except yours, and I read yours. It takes me a long time. I get behind a lot, but I learn so much. And the way that you take poems, the way that you take quotes, the way that you tell stories, and then you apply them to what's happening today, it actually makes me feel calmer, because it's like, okay, the world didn't explode. We've gotten through this. We can do this again. And it is. I would encourage people to sign up for it, to subscribe to it, because it is one of the things that I look forward to in my inbox every week. And so for people who want to find you, they go to scottmonty.com. Is that the best way?
Yep, that's the easiest way, scottmonty.com. You can sign up for the newsletter there. You can read past posts, etc. But Laura, I think your ability to see what I'm trying to get to without speaking it is giving people an oasis of calm. It's going to be okay. And knowing that we've been through things before, and that the world hasn't completely blown up. I want to close with this poem, and I'm gonna stretch over into my other interest, which is Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, we didn't even get a chance to talk about Sherlock Holmes. I feel like I need to have you on a whole other show for that.
Nobody wants to hear about that. Vincent Starrett was a columnist in a lot of Chicago newspapers, and a bookman, and an early member of the Baker Street Irregulars. And in 1943, at the height of World War II, he wrote this sonnet about that fabled place where Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson live. Here dwell together still two men of note, who never lived and so can never die. How very near they seem, yet how remote that age before all the world went awry. But still the game's afoot for those with ears attuned to catch the distant view. Hello! England is England, yet for all our fears, only those things the heart believes are true. A yellow fog swirls past the window pane as night descends upon this fabled street. A lonely hansom splashes through the rain. The ghostly gas lamps fail at 20 feet. Here, though the world explode, these two survive, and it is always 1895.
Scott, from my home in Boston to your home outside of Detroit to 21 Baker Street, 21B Baker Street, 221B. Oh my goodness, Baker Street, and my camera that seems to keep going on and off. I want to thank you for spending this morning with us. You're amazing.
Thank you so much, Laura.